Well, hey everyone, we're glad that you're joining us, and it's hard to believe, but it's already to week 5 of this series, and so I'm here with David Griffin, one of our co-pastors, and we are here with some of the brightest minds in the Dallas-Fort Worth area joining us, David, right?
They are, yeah.
Or at least
sure.
Some of our Sea Life family. So we're glad you guys are here, and we're thankful that you've come and joined in this discussion with us. And we've got a lot of people watching at home, and so we want to encourage them to have a great discussion tonight. And so can we just express our appreciation to them for joining us tonight? You know, okay, if you remember, over the last few weeks, we've talked about how God wants us to have peace. We've talked about how control really is an illusion. We talked about how God teaches us not to be anxious and gives us some direction for how that we're to control our anxiety. And last week, we talked about how we can trust God to sustain us today because He sustained us in the past. And so today, we're going to talk about what is really at the root of our fears and our anxiety when the storms of life come. And so, David, why don't you read the passage of Scripture for us?
You know, this passage is so interesting to me because, you know, when we look at it, we're kind of overwhelmed by the security that Jesus seems to have when everyone else is kind of freaking out. And if we could maybe even picture this, kind of make it a metaphor for our own lives as we read it, I think it'd be helpful. So it says, on that day when the evening had come, He said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took with them in the boat just as He was. And other boats were with Him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But He was in the stern, He being Jesus, asleep on the cushion. And they woke Him and said, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And He awoke and rebuked the wind and sea and said, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was great calm. And then He says to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey Him?"
Yeah, that's a great story, isn't it? You know, at the end of this story, Jesus asked 2 questions that really should give us a lot of insight. He asked these 2 questions. He said, first of all, why are you so afraid? And I don't know if you've ever had that question asked of you or if you've ever asked that question. I feel like as a parent, I ask that question a lot, like, why are you so afraid about this? We've got a 6-year-old girl that has a lot of incredible talents and gifts, but courage is not one of them. And so she is always, if there's a bug that comes into the house, she will absolutely lose it. And I'm going, "Julia, why are you so afraid?" You know? But so Jesus said, "Why are you so afraid?" And his second question was, "Have you still no faith?" And if you notice what he does there, he draws this correlation between faith and fear, or between the absence of faith and fear. And so here in the story, the disciples, they're literally out of control. In this story, they have no control. They're not in control of their own destiny. They're not in control of their own results. They're not in control of their own consequences. The storms are really crushing in on their faith.
Yeah, you know, and this is really kind of a metaphor for life. I love the fact in this story, I believe in one of the translations it says, "Suddenly a great windstorm arose." And I think that's really kind of how the storms of life come. They come very suddenly. Just recently, we had a downburst right near my house. And, you know, you can put this on my bragging montage. I used to have 3 trees in my yard. Now I've got 2 because this big, 20-inch tree just got split right in half. And the wind, I don't know if any of you remember that storm that we just had here, but the wind was absolutely unbelievable. It was probably one of the most fierce summer storms I've ever seen in my life. It felt like we were in a hurricane all of a sudden. And I wonder if that isn't what Jesus went through right here, or the boat went through, but yet Jesus is still completely calm. It's kind of hard when you recognize in a storm that you're completely and totally out of control. And so this is, like we said, a metaphor of what happens in life, the storms of life. And I mean, you can think of some of what those things would be. I mean, when you lose your job, when you're having a financial crisis, when your marriage is falling apart, there's a health issue that's developed, the Cowboys lose a preseason game, just all of those things, I mean, we got to be careful because they can all just, cause our faith to dissipate because we recognize that we're not in control and we have to turn to the one who actually is.
What's crazy about this in this whole story is that Jesus is actually on the boat. That's the thing that's always amazed me about the story is that, it's like this idea that you're going to be reading in the Bible, and you come to this point, and it says, and Jesus was on the boat with the disciples going across the lake, and a storm came, and they all died. End of story. Right, you know, I'm like, that'd be a really bad ending to the whole gospel story. If you know, so you would think that they would go, man, Jesus is here, we're okay, but that wasn't their reaction. And so let's talk about this together some. Has there ever been a time in your life that you were going through a storm, and you felt like Jesus was asleep?
Asleep at the wheel.
Yeah.
Kind of a little, it's a variation of the Carrie Underwood song.
I think that's the opposite of the Carrie Underwood song, David, but anyway.
It's true.
Ever been a time in your life that you're going through a storm and you wondered where God was? You felt like Jesus was asleep?
Before I met my husband, I was older, and I lived by myself, and it got to a point where I got to some breaking points, and I would be in my room just really upset, like, why not me, God? Where are you? Where are you? Why am I single? Why am I not good enough and not pretty enough? Or all these things were going through my mind. And I was going to church and I was serving in the church, but all those things were still popping up. And let alone he was there the whole time. It's just, it felt like I was in an empty room and the devil was just attacking my mind at the time.
And had he allowed you to take the reins, you wouldn't have ended up with this wonderful hunk of a man sitting right next to you, would you?
Yes, I would have definitely
settled for something much less.
Yes, he's the best.
Much less.
Heaven,
well, you know, and isn't it funny how in those times when you don't know how it's going to work out, but when you look back on those times and you go, oh man, it's so clear how God was working in that.
Yeah, you know? he was, I guess you could say, saving me the whole time. He was watching me the whole time, saying, just wait, he's coming. Even though I didn't trust him right then. I was like, are you sure? But no, he knew exactly what was going on. I felt empty. I felt like he was asleep.
Yeah.
Heaven, you had something? I saw you.
So I didn't grow up with a great home life, and then I had like a mom and a dad. They adopted me, and I kind of was taken in by their family. And then on December 3rd of 2013, my mom passed away overnight, and very unexpectedly. And at that moment, I was a generally new believer. And I wondered if God was even real at that moment anymore. I wondered if he had forgotten about me. He had finally given me something and shown me love and showed me, you know, just blessings. And then my mom was taken from me. And it come to find out, like, just he was obviously so involved at that moment, and there was a reason. And there was a moment at her funeral. Her funeral was during a huge ice storm in 2013. And God basically showed us in different ways that he is still in control, and he has chosen this. Sea Life had no electricity for her funeral. They couldn't even, the pastors couldn't even make it. We had people on standby just wearing like Baylor t-shirts. And
that's always a good t-shirt.
Hey.
Always appropriate.
And so in that moment, God just showed me, like, even though this is something that's heartbroken, that I'm still here and I am in control and I'm controlling this.
So, Heaven, how long had you been a believer at that point?
At that point, probably about 1 year.
Wow.
So it was very new, and to put trust in, I almost lost faith, but he just kept showing me that he was in control and that he had a plan for this, and just, hey, look at me, I'm here.
Yeah. So do you remember any specific points in that whole thing that you really just felt that sense of, man, God, where are you? Do you remember, were there any specific times that you remember that?
There definitely was. I remember the night that it all happened, we were actually doing CPR on her, and I remember out loud saying, God, if you are real, you will breathe life into her. Wow. And I just remember thinking, when that didn't happen, is he real? Yeah. And but because of that, that woman is the reason why I am a believer. She's the one that brought me to the faith and brought me to know who he is. So it's like there was a reason why she was in my life. There was a reason why we went through that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Somebody else.
So we were the type that felt like when it was time for us to have kids, we're just going to do it. This is the date. This is the month. This is the year. And it ended up...
Had a tight plan there.
We had control. And it ended up taking 3 years before we adopted our son. And so during that time of infertility, and that was definitely the time for me where I just thought, we're good, faithful servants. Why, we have a great home. Why aren't we getting pregnant? And people around us, it felt like everyone was. But in the end, we kind of saw that if we had gotten pregnant, we wouldn't have adopted our son.
Right.
So it was all part of God's plan.
Yeah, that's good. Somebody else.
A few years ago, my uncle was battling brain cancer, and I remember feeling super hopeful and having all this faith mustered up and praying, and, the prayers not going the way that my family and I, what we wanted to happen. And I, looking back, with this hindsight, I know that I wasn't able to always see the Lord, and it was on me because I was holding on to the hurt. And even though it hurts to look back and see that, it is good to see that he was there and he was faithful. But because I wanted to hold on to the hurt and I was holding on to the worry, I wasn't always able to experience him. And so I'm thankful to have that now and know that for future storms, instead of holding on to the hurt, to let go and experience God and let him be the Lord, even of those tough seasons.
Yeah, that's good. Somebody else.
In my early 20s, from teenager to early 20s, I guess, I struggled with sexual sin in my life, and I was raised in the church, grew up in a Christian home, had great parents, like the typical storybook child, I guess. Right. And I just remember being so empty and feeling so alone and feeling like, God, like, why are you letting all these things happen to me? Why am I struggling with this? Why do I have to deal with this? And, the whole time I kept thinking, I was a little immature, but I was thinking like, man, I just wish I had a testimony. I wish I had something I could share with somebody. And, just in my immaturity over the years, he developed that testimony, and I can look back now and I can say like, man, he delivered me. Like, I am free from this. I am completely made new. My mind has been renewed. But during that season, there were times when I was just like, there can't be a God. Like, why would I be struggling with this if this is not his will? So the Bible says. Right. And so why would he allow me to struggle with something that he clearly outlines is sinful? And it was just through that process and through that time, he was just developing a testimony and a love for him through that.
Yeah, that's good.
I think we all have, things in our life that we would have chosen not to go through had we known what it would be like beforehand. But yet now on the backside, we're grateful that we did go through them. And, I always kind of every so often I think that I think it's a Garth Brooks song about, I could have missed the pain, but I had to miss the dance.
Great theologian Garth.
Yeah, oh yeah, deep stuff. No, I mean, some people quote scripture, I quote Garth, So, but I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the dance. And so I think that there's some real beauty in even the pain.
I know for us, Jill and I started a process of adoption and when we started this process, it was supposed to take 6 months or 6 to 9 months to adopt from Ethiopia at the time. And at that time, there was a lot of stuff that happened that changed kind of the whole adoption framework in Ethiopia. And so instead of taking 6 to 9 months, it took 2.5 years. And so in that 2.5 years, there was a lot of oh my gosh, why is this taking so long? And we're trying to be obedient to God in this, and we're trying to do what we feel like God's leading us to do. And I remember at one point Jill was really frustrated with it, and she said, Paul, why do you think this is taking so long? And it just became so clear to me, we were going to get an infant girl, and she wasn't born yet. And when I look back on that, story and just think, man, for us, the little girl we got is so perfect for our family. And I'm going, man, if we would have had what we wanted, if we would have been able to just, if God would have been awake, if he wouldn't have been, sleeping, it would have messed up everything for us, And so let me ask you this question. So how is it that in your experience that you've grown in the midst of storms. So, Chase, you got something?
Yeah. It just kind of made me think that a lot of times when you're going through a storm, it's really easy for you to look at God and think that he's the source. You know, God, why are you doing this to me, and why now? And we often forget that there's an enemy out there. Yeah. And you know, God may have something great, you know, in mind for us and in our calling and in our plan. And this is Satan's every intention to derail us from getting there. And I think one of the best lessons you can learn through going through this storm is that you're important enough for Satan to want to derail you. So obviously God has something valuable for you in your life, and you just kind of have to focus on that.
That's good. Somebody else. Something that you learn in the midst of storms.
I think it also gives you compassion for other people and a connection, because until, you know, we had that experience, we did not know anything about the adoption world or infertility. And now, like, when people are going through that, you can share what happened with you and the verses you looked up to. Right. So it definitely gives you a connection that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
That's good. Anybody else?
I know personally for Heaven and I, there has been a storm at one point in our marriage. And at one point it was either abandon ship or work to get it right. And of course we're still here right now. So we chose to work and get it right. And through that storm, I became a better husband, a better father, you know. So that's really helped me be a better person through a storm. Yeah,
that's good. That's good. You know, I think for all of us, it really is important just to understand how God uses the storms in our lives. That, you know, I think for the disciples in the boat, that they had to leave that moment, and anytime a storm came up and, you know, they were in a boat, the next time they were in a boat, they recognized, hey, Jesus is still in control of the storms. And for all of us, we get to face the storms of life. And when we get to the other side, the next time we're in the middle of a storm, we can look back and go, man, God's still at work in our lives, and it was so clear there. And so we're going to throw it back to the people at home. And so we want you guys at home to have a great discussion as well. We want God to work in your heart. We want you to be able to answer the same questions that we've answered. And so let's just encourage them as we go out tonight to have a great discussion the way we have. Thank you so much.